Most Western fans know about Tombstone's legendary gunfights and Val Kilmer's iconic Doc Holliday performance. But few realize the bizarre behind-the-scenes chaos that nearly derailed the film. From a secret director pulling all-nighters to actors literally lying on ice to achieve realism, the making of this 1993 classic was as wild as the Old West itself. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Tombstone. Fact 1. Kurt Russell was the secret director. While George P. Cosmatos received official credit as the director of Tombstone, the truth behind the camera tells a completely different story. Kurt Russell, who starred as Wyatt Earp, was actually the one calling all the shots throughout the entire production, making him one of Hollywood's most successful ghost directors. The unusual arrangement came about when original director Kevin Jarre was fired just 1 month into filming for falling behind schedule and struggling with his first major directing job. Rather than take the director's chair himself and potentially damage his acting career, Russell hired Cosmatos to serve as his frontman while he secretly ran the show from behind the scenes. Russell had worked with Cosmatos before and knew he could trust him to follow instructions without question. Every single night during production, Russell would go to Cosmatos' hotel room and hand him a detailed shot list for the next day's filming. Russell made it clear that there would be no arguments or negotiations about these decisions. As Russell later explained in interviews, he told Cosmatos that he would give him the shot list each evening, and that would be exactly what they would film the following day. This arrangement meant that Russell was essentially working 2 full-time jobs simultaneously. He was not only memorizing his lines and performing as the lead actor during the day, but he was also staying up late into the night, planning every camera angle, deciding on the pacing of scenes, and making all the creative choices that normally fall to a director. Russell has said that during the production of Tombstone, he was only getting about 4 hours of sleep each night because of this double workload. Russell kept this secret for nearly 20 years, promising Cosmatos that he would never reveal the truth while the credited director was still alive. It wasn't until 2013, almost 10 years after Cosmatos passed away, that Russell finally opened up about the real story behind Tombstone's direction in a candid interview with True West magazine. Fact 2. Only one mustache was fake. In a film filled with authentic period details and rugged Western characters, every single mustache you see on screen was grown naturally by the actors themselves, with one notable exception. John Tenney, who played the corrupt sheriff Johnny Behan, was the only member of the entire cast who had to wear a fake mustache throughout the production. The reason behind this unusual situation had nothing to do with Tenney's ability to grow facial hair, but rather with the demanding schedule of Hollywood productions. Just before filming began on Tombstone, Tenney had been working on another project that required him to be completely clean-shaven. Since movies are often filmed out of sequence and actors sometimes work on multiple projects back-to-back, there simply wasn't enough time between his previous role and the start of Tombstone filming for him to grow out a proper mustache that would match the 1880s time period. This attention to facial hair authenticity was part of director George Cosmatos' obsessive focus on historical accuracy throughout the film. The production team went to extraordinary lengths to make sure that costumes, props, customs, and even the smallest visual details would give the movie a genuine feel that transported audiences back to the Old West. Having actors grow their own mustaches was just one of many ways the filmmakers tried to create an authentic atmosphere rather than relying on obvious movie makeup. For the rest of the male cast, growing period-appropriate facial hair meant committing to the look for months before and during filming. This included major stars like Kurt Russell, Val Kilmer, Sam Elliott, Bill Paxton, and Powers Booth, all of whom sported their own naturally grown mustaches that perfectly fit their characters and the time period. The commitment to this level of detail helped create the realistic, lived-in feeling that made Tombstone stand out from other westerns of the era, even though most audiences would never notice that only one mustache among dozens was actually fake. Fact 3. Val Kilmer slept on ice for his death scene. Val Kilmer's commitment to making Doc Holliday's final moments as realistic as possible led him to one of the most extreme method acting choices in the entire production. When it came time to film the scene where Doc Holliday dies from tuberculosis in a Colorado sanatorium, Kilmer made an unusual request that shocked even the experienced film crew. Kilmer asked the production team to fill his bed with ice so that he could experience genuine cold and discomfort while filming the death scene. He wanted his body to naturally shake and convulse from the freezing temperature, believing this would create a more authentic portrayal of someone dying from the lung disease that had ravaged Doc Holliday's body. Rather than relying on acting techniques alone to simulate the physical effects of tuberculosis, Kilmer chose to put his body through actual physical stress to achieve the realistic trembling and weakness that viewers see on screen. This approach was typical of Kilmer's intense method acting style throughout the entire Tombstone production. He had already spent months preparing for the role by practicing his quick-draw techniques and developing Doc Holliday's distinctive Southern accent, but the ice bed represented perhaps his most physically demanding choice for the character. The decision meant that every shiver, every labored breath, and every sign of physical distress that audiences see in Doc's final scene was genuinely felt by Kilmer as he lay on the freezing surface. The technique actually has some precedent in Hollywood history, as Kilmer's acting idol Marlon Brando had used a similar approach years earlier for his own death scene in Mutiny on the Bounty. However, most actors would have chosen to simulate these effects through traditional acting methods rather than subjecting themselves to the genuine discomfort of lying on ice for multiple takes. Kilmer's willingness to endure this physical challenge demonstrates the lengths he was prepared to go to ensure that Doc Holliday's death would feel emotionally authentic and visually convincing to audiences. Fact 4. The costume war sabotaged Wyatt Earp. In what became one of Hollywood's most strategic acts of sabotage, the Tombstone production team deliberately cornered the entire market for Western period costumes to give their competing film a significant advantage. When the Tombstone crew learned that Kevin Costner was simultaneously developing his own Wyatt Earp movie, they decided to take aggressive action to protect their project from the competition. The plan was brilliantly simple and devastatingly effective. The Tombstone costume department went out and rented every single piece of authentic 1880s Western clothing and period props that was available for rent in all of Hollywood. This wasn't just a matter of securing the best costumes for their own production, but rather a calculated move to leave absolutely nothing available for the Wyatt Earp team to use when their filming began. The strategy worked exactly as intended, forcing the Wyatt Earp production to face significant delays while they scrambled to find alternative costume sources. With no period-appropriate clothing available in Hollywood, the competing film's producers had no choice but to look internationally for their wardrobe needs. They eventually had to track down and import authentic Victorian-era clothing from Europe, which not only cost considerably more money but also pushed back their production schedule by several months. Kurt Russell, who was secretly directing Tombstone, later reflected on this bold move with admiration rather than regret. He noted that the costume shortage actually forced them to go to Europe for their wardrobe, which he pointed out was historically accurate, since the wealthy residents of the real Tombstone during the 1880s would have bought their finest clothes from European suppliers anyway. This costume war became just one example of the intense rivalry between the two productions, with both films racing to be the first Wyatt Earp movie to reach theaters. The Tombstone team's aggressive tactics in securing all available Western costumes gave them a crucial head start that helped them maintain their 6-month lead over the competing film. Fact 5. Billy Bob Thornton had no script lines. One of the most memorable confrontations in Tombstone features a young Billy Bob Thornton as an abusive card dealer who gets thrown out of a saloon by Wyatt Earp. But what makes this scene truly remarkable is that Thornton was given absolutely no written dialogue to perform. Instead of receiving a script with specific lines to memorize, Thornton was simply told by the director to be a bully, and then left to create his own intimidating character on the spot. This was long before Thornton became a household name for his breakout role in Sling Blade, which wouldn't come until 1996. At the time of Tombstone's filming in 1993, he was just another working actor trying to make his mark in Hollywood. taking whatever small roles he could find to pay the bills. The part of the troublesome card dealer was meant to be a brief scene that would demonstrate Wyatt Earp's ability to use psychological intimidation rather than violence to handle difficult situations. The scene was designed to show that Wyatt was the kind of man who could control a room through his presence and authority, rather than immediately resorting to his gun. When Thornton's character becomes aggressive and starts causing problems at the card table, Wyatt calmly approaches him and uses his reputation and commanding personality to defuse the situation without any bloodshed. Working without any predetermined dialogue, Thornton had to rely entirely on his instincts and improvisational skills to create a convincing bully character who would seem genuinely threatening, but not so over the top that he would overshadow Kurt Russell's measured response. The fact that this improvised performance feels so natural and fits seamlessly into the film shows both Thornton's raw talent as an actor and the confidence the filmmakers had in letting actors contribute their own creative ideas to their characters, even in relatively small roles. Fact 6. Robert Mitchum's horse accident changed everything. The legendary Robert Mitchum was originally supposed to play a major role in Tombstone as Newman Haynes Clanton, the patriarch of the outlaw Clanton family and leader of the Cowboys gang. However, a serious horseback riding accident during filming completely altered both Mitchum's involvement in the movie and the structure of the story itself, forcing the filmmakers to make significant last-minute changes to accommodate the veteran actor's injury. Mitchum, who was 76 years old at the time of filming, had been cast as Old Man Clanton because his commanding presence and weathered face perfectly fit the role of the ruthless cattle-rustling boss who controlled much of the criminal activity around Tombstone. The character was meant to be a central antagonist throughout the film, providing a patriarchal figure who would have given the Cowboys gang more depth and organization as they faced off against the Earp brothers. The accident occurred when Mitchum fell from his horse during one of the riding scenes, leaving him with injuries serious enough that he could no longer perform the physical demands required for his character. Rather than recast the important role or try to work around Mitchum's limitations with a reduced physical presence, the filmmakers made the unusual decision to completely write Old Man Clanton out of the screenplay entirely, to keep Mitchum involved in the production and take advantage of his iconic voice. The filmmakers offered him the role of narrator instead. This change meant that much of Old Man Clanton's original dialogue and plot significance had to be redistributed among other characters, particularly the remaining Cowboys gang members like Curly Bill Brocious and Johnny Ringo, who became more prominent villains to fill the leadership void. Mitchum's distinctive, gravelly voice ultimately became one of the most memorable elements of the film, providing the opening and closing narration that helped frame the story of the Earp brothers and their conflict with the Cowboys in the broader context of the changing American West. Fact 7. Wyatt Earp's real cousin played Billy Claiborne. Hidden among the cast of Tombstone is a genuine blood relative of the legendary lawman himself, making the film's connection to history even more remarkable than most viewers realize. Glenn Wyatt Earp III, who shortened his name to simply Wyatt Earp III for the movie credits, appears in the film playing Billy Claiborne, and he happens to be the fifth cousin of the actual Wyatt Earp who lived and fought in Tombstone during the 1880s. This casting choice wasn't just a coincidence or a publicity stunt, but rather represented the filmmakers' commitment to connecting their movie with the real people and events that inspired the story. Wyatt Earp III is a professional actor who has made a career out of portraying Old West figures, particularly his famous ancestor and Doc Holliday, in various stage productions and historical reenactments throughout his career. The real Wyatt Earp never had children of his own, so this family connection comes through other branches of the Earp family tree that continued the bloodline into modern times. For Wyatt Earp III, being cast in a major Hollywood production about his ancestor represented both an opportunity and a challenge, since he had spent years studying the historical Wyatt Earp and developing his own interpretations of the famous gunfighter's life and personality. Interestingly, Wyatt Earp III has mentioned in interviews that his association with the famous lawman has been both a blessing and a curse for his acting career. While the family connection has opened some doors and given him unique insights into Old West history, it has also sometimes limited the types of roles he's been offered, with casting directors often seeing him only as a Western character actor rather than considering him for more diverse parts. The decision to drop Glenn from his name for the film credits was likely made to emphasize his connection to the historical figure and to create a cleaner, more recognizable name that audiences would immediately associate with the Earp family legacy. Fact 8. Lester Moore's grave is real but fake. One of the most memorable moments in Tombstone occurs when the camera focuses on a weathered tombstone in Boot Hill Cemetery that reads, "Here lies Lester Moore, 4 slugs from a 44, no less no more." What makes this scene so fascinating is that while the tombstone itself is completely real and has been standing in the actual Boot Hill Cemetery in Tombstone, Arizona for over 60 years, the person it supposedly commemorates never actually existed. Lester Moore is entirely fictional, created by cemetery operators as part of their efforts to attract tourists to the historic graveyard. The tombstone was placed among the genuine burial plots of real people who died in Tombstone during the 1880s, but Moore himself is nothing more than an elaborate piece of marketing designed to entertain visitors with its darkly humorous wordplay and clever rhyming scheme. The fictional backstory created for Lester Moore claims that he was a Wells Fargo station agent in the border town of Naco, Arizona, who was shot and killed during a dispute over a damaged package with a man named Hank Dunston. According to this made-up legend, Moore took 4 bullets to the chest, but managed to fire 1 fatal shot of his own before dying, and both men died in the gunfight. However, there are no historical records of anyone named Lester Moore or Hank Dunston ever being involved in such an incident. Boot Hill Cemetery contains several other fake graves mixed in with the real burials, all designed to add colorful stories and humor to what might otherwise be a somber historical site. These fictional tombstones often feature witty epitaphs and amusing stories that capture the spirit of Old West folklore, even though they don't represent actual people who lived and died in Tombstone. The filmmakers chose to include Lester Moore's tombstone in their movie not because they believed it was historically accurate, but because it perfectly captured the dark humor and violent atmosphere of the Old West that they wanted to establish from the very beginning of their story. Fact 9. Kevin Costner's exit created the film. The version of Tombstone that audiences know and love might never have existed if Kevin Costner hadn't walked away from the project due to fundamental disagreements about what kind of movie it should be. Costner was originally attached to star as Wyatt Earp in the film, but his vision for the story clashed dramatically with screenwriter Kevin Jarrett's approach, leading to a split that would ultimately result in 2 competing Wyatt Earp movies being made at the same time. The creative conflict centered on the focus and tone of the film. Costner believed the movie should concentrate primarily on Wyatt Earp's personal journey and character development, showing his transformation from a family man into a legendary lawman through a more serious, dramatic approach. Jarre, on the other hand, wanted to create an action-packed ensemble piece that would highlight the relationships between multiple colorful characters, particularly the friendship between Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, while building up to the famous gunfight at the OK Corral as a major action sequence. When neither man was willing to compromise on their vision, Costner made the decision to leave Tombstone entirely and develop his own separate Wyatt Earp project with director Lawrence Kasdan. However, Costner didn't simply walk away quietly. Using his considerable influence in Hollywood following his success with Dances with Wolves, he actively worked to sabotage the Tombstone production by convincing most major studios to refuse to distribute the competing film. This left the Tombstone producers scrambling to find a distributor willing to take on their project, while Costner moved forward with his own 3-hour biographical epic that would eventually become the 1994 film Wyatt Earp. Kurt Russell later acknowledged Costner's power play with a mixture of respect and amusement, noting that Costner was influential enough at the time to make such moves and calling it good hardball. The irony is that Costner's attempt to destroy Tombstone ultimately backfired, as his own film became a critical and commercial disappointment, while Tombstone became a beloved classic. Fact 10. The original director was fired after 1 month. Kevin Jarre, the screenwriter who had created the script for Tombstone, based on his extensive research into the real events surrounding Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, was given the opportunity to make his directorial debut with the film. However, his transition from writing to directing proved to be far more challenging than anyone anticipated, leading to his removal from the project after just 1 month of filming. Jarre had established himself as a talented screenwriter, with acclaimed scripts for films like Glory and Judgment Night, but directing a major motion picture required a completely different set of skills that he had never developed. The demands of managing a large cast, coordinating complex action sequences, and maintaining a tight shooting schedule while staying within budget proved overwhelming for someone with no previous directing experience. The production quickly fell behind schedule under Jarre's leadership, with the inexperienced director struggling to make the quick decisions and adjustments that are essential for keeping a film on track. Studio executives became increasingly concerned as filming days were lost and costs began to mount, while the cast and crew grew frustrated with the lack of clear direction and organization on set. The situation became unsustainable when it became clear that Jarre was not equipped to handle the fast-paced, high-pressure environment of a major Hollywood production. The studio made the difficult decision to remove him from the director's chair and find a replacement who could salvage the project and get it back on schedule. George Cosmatos was brought in as the new director, largely because Kurt Russell had worked with him before and knew he would be willing to follow Russell's creative vision for the film. While Jarre remained credited as the screenwriter for his original script, his brief stint as director served as a reminder that writing and directing require vastly different skill sets, and that even talented writers don't automatically make successful directors without proper experience and training. Fact 11. Doc's famous lines were historically accurate. Many of the most memorable quotes delivered by Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday weren't created by Hollywood screenwriters, but were actually taken directly from historical records and newspaper accounts from the 1880s. The filmmakers made a deliberate effort to research authentic dialogue and incorporate real phrases that the historical Doc Holliday was known to have used, giving Kilmer's performance an extra layer of authenticity that most audiences never realized. One of the most famous lines in the film comes when Doc responds to an opponent's threat by saying, "You're a daisy if you do." This phrase wasn't invented for the movie but was reportedly documented in newspaper articles from the time period, where it was recorded as something Doc Holliday actually said during a confrontation. The original newspaper version was slightly different, with the historical Doc apparently saying, "You're a daisy if you have," but the filmmakers adapted it to fit the specific scene while maintaining the spirit of the original. Quote, "The historical accuracy extends even to Doc's final moments in the film. When Doc Holliday dies from tuberculosis in the Colorado sanatorium, his last words are, 'I'll be damned,' which according to historical accounts were the actual final words spoken by the real Doc Holliday before he died in 1887. These words were reportedly overheard by his attending nurse and recorded as part of the historical record of his death. This attention to authentic dialogue reflects the broader commitment that screenwriter Kevin Jarre had made to researching the real people and events that inspired Tombstone. Jarre spent considerable time studying newspaper archives, historical documents, and first-hand accounts from people who had known the real Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, allowing him to weave genuine historical details into his script. The result is that many of Doc's most quotable lines carry the weight of historical truth, making Val Kilmer's performance not just entertaining, but also surprisingly accurate to the wit and personality of the real John Henry Holliday. Fact 12. Actors wore wool in 134-degree heat. The commitment to historical authenticity in Tombstone extended to every detail of the costumes, including requiring the entire cast to wear genuine wool clothing that was accurate to the 1880s time period even though filming took place during the blazing heat of an Arizona summer. This decision created incredibly uncomfortable working conditions that pushed the actors to their physical limits while trying to deliver their performances. Screenwriter Kevin Jarre, who was obsessed with historical accuracy, insisted that all the costumes be made from authentic materials that people would have actually worn in the Old West during that era. This meant that instead of using modern synthetic fabrics that might look similar, but would be more comfortable in extreme heat, the actors had to endure the same heavy wool garments that real cowboys and lawmen would have worn in Tombstone during the 1880s. The most extreme example of these brutal conditions occurred during filming inside the recreated Birdcage Theater set, where Val Kilmer noticed that a thermometer registered an astonishing 134 degrees Fahrenheit. To put this temperature in perspective, that's only 18 degrees below the hottest temperature ever officially recorded on Earth, making it nearly unbearable for anyone to work in, let alone while wearing heavy wool clothing and performing demanding scenes. Kilmer later joked that the oppressive heat and uncomfortable wool costumes might explain why Doc Holliday was such a deadly and irritable character, suggesting that anyone forced to wear wool in the Arizona Territory summer heat would naturally become violent and unpredictable. The extreme conditions meant that actors had to take frequent breaks to avoid heat exhaustion, and the production had to carefully schedule filming around the hottest parts of the day to prevent serious health problems. Despite the miserable working conditions, the authentic wool costumes contributed significantly to the film's realistic appearance and helped the actors get into character by experiencing something closer to what their historical counterparts would have endured in the unforgiving climate of the American Southwest. Fact 13. The film beat its competition by 6 months. Tombstone managed to win the race to theaters by a crucial 6-month margin, arriving in cinemas on December 25, 1993, while Kevin Costner's competing Wyatt Earp film didn't reach audiences until June 24, 1994. This timing advantage proved to be absolutely devastating for the competing production, as Tombstone had already captured the public's attention and satisfied their appetite for Wyatt Earp stories before Costner's version even had a chance to make its case. The box office numbers tell the story of how dramatically this head start affected both films' success. Tombstone earned $73 million worldwide on a modest $25 million budget, making it a clear financial winner that more than doubled its production costs. Meanwhile, Wyatt Earp struggled to find an audience and brought in only $56 million globally, despite having a much larger $63 million budget, making it a significant commercial disappointment. Part of Wyatt Earp's failure can be attributed to audience fatigue, as moviegoers had already seen and enjoyed one Wyatt Earp story and weren't particularly interested in sitting through another version so soon afterward, especially one that lasted over 3 hours compared to Tombstone's more manageable 2-hour runtime. Critics and audiences also responded much more favorably to Tombstone's faster pace, memorable dialogue, and focus on action and character relationships, while Wyatt Earp was criticized for being slow, overly long, and lacking the entertainment value that made Tombstone so rewatchable. The timing advantage also meant that Tombstone had the benefit of positive word of mouth and critical praise building up over the months leading to Wyatt Earp's release, creating an uphill battle for Costner's film that it was never able to overcome. Kevin Costner himself has since admitted that he regrets the timing conflict and wishes the two films hadn't been released so close together, acknowledging that the competition ultimately hurt his project more than it helped either film. Fact 14. Russell cut himself out to earn trust. Kurt Russell made one of the most surprising decisions in Hollywood history when he deliberately removed 20 pages of his own dialogue and scenes from the Tombstone script, essentially cutting down his starring role to earn the trust and respect of his fellow actors. This selfless choice was part of Russell's strategy to create a better ensemble film and to establish his credibility as the secret director who was really running the production behind the scenes. Russell recognized that he was in an unusual position, serving as both the lead actor and the uncredited director, while George Cosmatos acted as his front man. He knew that if the other actors discovered he was making all the creative decisions, they might become resentful or suspicious of his motives, especially if they felt he was using his director's power to give himself the best scenes and most important moments in the film. To prevent this potential conflict and demonstrate his commitment to making the best possible movie rather than showcasing himself, Russell made the bold choice to significantly reduce his own screen time and dialogue. He told True Western magazine that he believed there was only one way to get the trust of the other actors, and that was to cut himself out of the movie and make important changes to his character's role in the story. Instead of dominating every scene as the traditional leading man, Russell transformed Wyatt Earp into what he called an aura character, someone whose presence and reputation would be felt throughout the film even when he wasn't speaking or taking center stage. This approach allowed other characters, particularly Val Kilmer's Doc Holliday, to have more memorable moments and quotable lines, while Russell's Wyatt became a more mysterious and compelling figure who commanded respect through his actions rather than his words. The strategy worked perfectly, as the ensemble cast delivered exceptional performances and created one of the most balanced and entertaining westerns ever made, with Russell's restrained but powerful portrayal of Wyatt Earp serving as the steady foundation that held the entire film together. Fact 15. The OK Corral was historically inaccurate on purpose. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone takes place in a large, open lot that gives the characters plenty of room to move around and face off against each other, but this spacious setting was a deliberate departure from historical accuracy that the filmmakers chose to make the scene more visually exciting. In reality, the actual gunfight location was a cramped space that was only about 15 feet wide, which would have made for a much less dramatic and cinematic showdown. The real gunfight that took place on October 26, 1881, occurred in a narrow vacant lot near the OK Corral, not inside the corral itself, and the confined space meant that the participants were practically standing on top of each other when the shooting began. This tight quarters situation would have made it difficult for cameras to capture the action effectively, and would have prevented the filmmakers from creating the kind of sweeping, epic confrontation that audiences expect from a major Western movie. By expanding the location into a much larger area, the Tombstone filmmakers were able to choreograph a longer, more elaborate gunfight sequence that lasted over 90 seconds on screen, compared to the historically accurate version that would have been over in less than 30 seconds. The larger space also allowed for better camera angles, more dramatic positioning of the characters, and the kind of suspenseful buildup that makes the scene one of the most memorable moments in the entire film. This choice perfectly illustrates the balance that filmmakers must strike between historical accuracy and entertainment value. While Kevin Costner's competing Wyatt Earp film stayed closer to the historically accurate cramped location, their gunfight scene ended up feeling anticlimactic and claustrophobic, lasting less than a minute, and lacking the grand Western movie feel that audiences were hoping to see. The Tombstone team's decision to prioritize cinematic spectacle over strict historical accuracy ultimately contributed to creating one of the most iconic gunfight scenes in Western movie history, proving that sometimes a little creative license can make history more compelling than the truth.